Welcome to the last lecture of the course Structural Reliability organized by the PMRF ISS's teaching program. I am Trisha Chakraborty, a second year PhD student at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. I'll start with the topics that we have covered and the one that we hope to cover today. We started lecture 1 with a review of probability theory and basic statistical distributions because this is relevant and this is a prerequisite of this course because when we are modeling uncertainty, when we are modeling a system with uncertain parameters, we have to model those parameters as random variables, and they will be defined or described by a statistical distribution like normal, log normal, gumbel, Weibull, etc. And they can be described by their means and standard deviations. Like there's a kind of representation we saw last class. There's a second moment representation that has that a random variable will be described only by its mean and standard deviation or mean and variance. Or then there are the higher order moments that give additional information about the random variable. And if we know the entire distribution, if we know the CDF or the PDF of the random variable, we have the complete description. So for reliability studies, we need to model the uncertain parameters using random variables. That is how why probability and statistics are relevant here. Then we defined limit state functions and derived partial safety factors. A limit state is anything that is it is a mathematical representation of a particular mode of failure of a structure or of a system. So what for example, the example that I often give is that a beam can have several limit states. It can have a deflection limit state, that is, for example, the tip deflection of a cantilever beam should not exceed 5 mm. So then the limit state is expressed in the form of capacity minus demand. So capacity here will be the 5 mm and the demand will be the actual deflection on the beam. So it will be 5 minus the actual beam deflection should be greater than or equal to 0. So that will mean that the limit state is successful or holding, and otherwise it will mean it has failed. And this is why defining failure is also a very important topic of structural reliability. That we and a single physical element consists of several limit states connected logically, so they can be connected in series or parallel, that we will look at today. And we have looked at deriving partial safety factors, which are a product of limit state design that is used in most of the design codes in the world today. There are two types of partial safety factors, one that is applied on the capacity and one on the demand. For the capacity, we apply the partial safety factor that is greater than 1 on the denominator, so that we take a lesser capacity than the actual capacity of my system. And on the demand, we apply the partial safety factor on the new in the numerator. So we design for a load capacity, for a demand or load greater than what we expect to come. So that means that we are approximating both the capacity and the demand on the safer side, and that gives rise to an inherent reliability of our design codes, and that can be found out once we know the methods of estimating reliability. If we have the limit state equation in the form of the capacity divided by partial safety factor minus the partial safety factor into demand, we can find out its implied reliability, which would be expected to be something around 3, 4, 5, the reliability index beta. In lecture 4, we have looked at the numerical or simulation methods for studying reliability, estimating it mathematically. So there was a special emphasis on Monte Carlo methods, which are used very widely. In Monte Carlo methods, we don't see the reliability expression, as we have seen, is the reliability or the probability of failure is expressed in the term of multidimensional integral. So the integral is the integral of the limit state over all the basic variables in the domain of failure, that is when capacity is less than demand. So that is a very complicated integral, and Monte Carlo simulation numerical methods bypasses the need to evaluate that integral analytically. So what we do instead is that we simulate or generate the system randomly a large number of times, and we analyze it, and then we check for each limit state. For every time we simulate it, we corresponding to each limit state, we see whether it has failed or it is holding. And then we use the basic statistical concept that if we have run the system for 10 million times and it has failed 10 times, then the probability of failure of that limit state will be 10 divided by 10 million. So that is how we can get it. And now Monte Carlo methods are computationally quite expensive, because often when we are working with complicated or real life systems, the analyzing the structure even once takes a lot of time. So if we have to generate it 10,000, 10 million times, it will take a large it will take a very large computational effort and time. So there are some variance reduction techniques that allows us to get a reasonably accurate measure of probability of failure with lesser number of trials. So there are Latin hypercube sampling, importance sampling, directional sampling, and so on. All these we have looked at in lecture 4. Yesterday in the lecture 5, we have seen the second moment and transformation methods for studying reliability. The FOSM, the form, SORM, and the Hasse-Ferlin, Neteff, and Rosenblatt transformations. These are analytical methods to simplify the integral. In the Monte Carlo method is a purely numerical method, purely statistical method. But these methods are to simplify the integral, that the convolution integral that has to be evaluated. And that is also not, even with these methods, it is not for real life or practical structures, it is not easy. So the forms are more for academic, like intellectual fulfillment than actual application. Monte Carlo methods are still used, are much more in use than these analytical methods. And today we will look at system reliability, that is, so in all, so far what we have looked at is a single limit state. We have looked at a single limit state, and we have tried to calculate the probability of that limit state, a failure or success. Today we will look at what physical elements, even if a beam is a single physical element, it can have a lot of limit states: a flexural limit state, shear limit state, deflection limit state, and so on. Deflection at various points and whatever. So how those limit states are connected, and if we can evaluate the probability of failure of each limit state, what can we say about the limit probability of failure of the whole system? So that's what we are going to look at today. This is the course structure. Module 1, the first two classes was, I think, 18th and 19th September. I covered review of probability theory, measures of structural reliability, partial safety factors, limit state function. Module 2 was comprised of two classes: types of uncertainty, risk assessment, probability of failure, integration and simulation methods, with special emphasis on Monte Carlo method and variance reduction. Module 3 was yesterday: second moment and transformation methods, Hasse-Ferlin, Neteff, and Rosenblatt transformation, form and sum, that is first order and second order reliability methods. And module 4 is today's class: system reliability, load, material, and system modeling, series and parallel systems, and will touch upon response surfaces. This course has a focus on the application of reliability methods to civil engineering, which is broadly called as risk and reliability. So, reliability is one of the most, like civil engineering is one of the most important applications of reliability, and some other areas like mechanical and aerospace engineering also work on reliability. So today's lecture is reliability of structural systems. Introduction. Even in simple structures composed of just one element, various limit states such as bending action, shear, buckling, axial stress, deflection, etc. may apply. Most structures are, in addition, composed of many members or elements. So, a beam itself has several limit states. A column itself is a connection of several limit states, and then our entire. Suppose if you are looking at a building, it is a collection of floor slabs, beams, columns, foundations, and so many elements. So, and these limit states here: bending action, shear, buckling, axial stress, all are called termed as collapse limit states, because they have to, they concern, like if they fail there is some kind of collapse or damage. While deflection is called a serviceability limit state, even if suppose there is, it is a possible that the deflection limit state is violated by a structure, by an element, but it has not collapsed. So it does not actually lead to collapse or damage, but it may hamper the purpose for which the structure was built. For example, there has to be for example, in parking lots there has to be a certain clearance above for so that the vehicle can pass. So if the beam deflects too much, it may hamper that. Or in factory sheds also, this reflection limiter is important, because instruments may need to pass and they need to have a certain clearance. So these are called serviceability limit states, and they are both important. One might say that collapse limit states are more important, because if it fails, it can have disastrous results. But the serviceability limit states also have to be taken into account. So such a composition of several elements is referred to as a structural system. So here we are defining system. The reliability of a structural system is likely to be a function of the reliability of its members, of course, for the following reasons. Load effects, stress resultants on different members may be obtained from one or more common loads. So this load effect thing means that we when we are writing capacity minus demand is a limit state, then we have to express both in the same units. So at the end of the day, if it is a steel section, or whose say bending limit state we are writing, then it means that the bending stress in any section of the beam should not exceed the yield stress of the steel material or of the concrete material. So generally we write these in terms of stress, like the collapse limit stress we write in terms of stresses. So load effect is the stress resultant. So if I have a simply supported beam and I'm applying a UDL on it, then I can find out the bending moment at each section, and from that I can find out the bending stress using the formula My by I, where M is the bending moment, Y is the distance of the fiber from the neutral axis, and I is the moment of inertia of the structure along the bending axis. So the stress resultant is My by I, and the M we are getting from the UDL. So that is the load effect corresponding to bending. And then there can be for another member also, the same load might be coming. For example, if there is a wind load coming on a structure, it will have some kind of load on all the structural elements, and for each of those elements a certain amount of stress, bending and shear or buckling will develop. So load effects or stress resultants on different members may be obtained from one or more common loads. Load and resistance may not be independent. The example, dead loads may be related to member size, and strength may be related to previously applied loadings. For example, earthquake loading. The dead loads are related to the member size, and then the resistance to earthquake also depends on the dead load. So that means that the resistance and load are related to the same to some same properties. So they are not independent of each other. Correlation of member properties such as member strength and stiffness may exist between different locations in the structure, and construction practices may influence member properties for a group of members. So construction practices means that the amount of quality control there is, and which factory is supplying the material. So the steel or the material will have some kind of, suppose the yield stress has some kind of distribution pattern. So the mean, it will have a certain mean what we are expecting, but one factory might have greater quality control, so it will have a lesser standard deviation on its yield stress or on the lengths. And another builder might have lesser quality control, and there could be a larger standard deviation. So all these construction practices, and then there are so many other things, like for example, in steel codes we have seen that for shop welding and site welding we use different factors of safety, because we assume that in site we can exert lesser control over the methods of construction, while in the shop we have a better control. So all these can influence the material properties for a group of members, all the members that are being generated from that place, or procured from a certain place.
হ্যাঁ, মানে বোঝা গেল বাঁদরেরও কিন্তু পড়াশোনায় রুচি নেই। ওইটুকুও ছেড়েছে, এবং যাদের রুচি নেই সেটাও ভাবছে না, নট লাইক আওয়ার মিনিস্টার্স।
Furthermore, there may exist limit states for the structure as a whole rather than its elements. For example, overall deflection, foundation settlement, residual stiffness, and the configuration of the structure itself may be of importance. It is likely, therefore, that the reliability assessment of structural systems will involve the need to consider multiple and perhaps correlated limit states. For time invariant loading, the structural reliability problem is reduced to one for which the probability of failure is sought under the maximum but uncertain loading applied only once to the system sometime during its life, 0 to TL. TL is the lifetime of the building. So buildings are generally built for a lifetime, for a fixed lifetime, for example 50 years, 75 years, 100 years. And because there are some kind of time related damage to the structure as well, like fatigue loading and creep fatigue, these things. So they are, when we are designing, we must keep in mind that we have to design for a certain lifetime. We can't keep like design it for an eternity. So after, maybe we can say that after 50 years there has to be an inspection and there has to be some major repair. Like that we general design. So for time invariant loading, the structural reliability, time invariant means that not dynamical loading. Earthquake is a dynamical process, but dead load, live load, these are time invariant loadings. The structural reliability problem is reduced to one for which the probability of failure is sought under the maximum but uncertain loading applied to the system only once, sometime during its life. Where there is more than one load applied to the structural system, this approach remains valid if the loads are all fully dependent, so that there is in essence only one independent load parameter. Systems reliability, structural system modeling. The analysis of realistic structural systems, even within a deterministic framework, can be a considerable task. Usually, it is facilitated by simplifications and idealizations in each of applied loads and load sequencing. This term part is called load modeling. Then structural system and its components and connection between components, system modeling, and material response and strength characteristics, material modeling. So there are three aspects that we have to model: the load, the system, and the material. The load and material are relatively easier to understand. The system means that the connectivity of the connectivity, both logically and the physical connectivity of the different elements or limit states. Criteria for limit state violation also needs to be specified. In conventional design, usually a permissible stress criterion is adopted, but other criteria may have greater validity. So criteria for limit state violation is what is meant by defining failure of a particular limit state. So usually the collapse limit states have a permissible stress criterion, the serviceability limit state have a permissible deflection or strain criterion. There can be something else that is up to the discretion of the engineer, how they would define the limit states and which limit states they would consider. Load modeling. We'll first start with load modeling. Probability of failure has been estimated using the probability distribution for certain extreme loading which might be applied to the structure sometime during its life. This idealization assumes that there is only one such load possible and that the structure is therefore essentially loaded only once. So this is time invariant. If the entire time dependent load pattern is considered, it is conceivable that some part of the structure might reach a local limit state before an overall structural limit is reached. Therefore, it is possible that the failure mode of a structure will depend on the exact loading sequence. So to simplify, we sometimes consider time invariant or time independent loading, but in the practical structure, it might often be time dependent loading. So we have to consider the exact loading sequence. Clearly, if the loading is a random process, this means that there are an infinity of possible load realization and hence failure probabilities, and impossible situation for analysis. Now, real life situations are often impossible to analyze because of their complexity. So we have to make some simplifying assumptions so that we can get a moderately decent estimation of whatever we are trying to estimate. And since when it comes to structures, you will always try to estimate on the safer side. The possibility of more than one loading process acting on the structural system only adds to the complexity. So there can be so many loading processes. Just if you look at just the simple four types of loading that we think immediately when we think of a structure: dead load, live load, wind load, earthquake load. Then there can be other loads like on offshore structure, flood loading. There can be fire damage. There can be a lot of other kinds of loading, but even outside the simple ones that we consider straight away. This is a graphical representation. This is a simple example of load path dependence. Horizontal load is applied before vertical load. It produces a different failure mode than an attempt to apply the loads in the reverse order. So here the horizontal is applied before the vertical, and here the vertical is applied before the horizontal. So the this shows that the failure points are different, and it shows that the failure envelope and the time mode of failing is different. Typical internal path action OBC within many realistic situations. So this means that the order or the sequence of loading also affects how the failure or the how the limit states will behave. This issue has been termed load path dependence in the literature, indicating that in many cases the estimated failure probability may depend on the path traced out by the stochastic vector of applied load processes. These are some research papers. This may be important for some structures. A simple example that was shown in the figure. It has a column loaded by a vertical force V and a horizontal force H. So this is the column. It has two loads. If the column were loaded first with a given value of vertical force as shown, as vertical force followed by an increasing horizontal force H, the load path would be VH as shown. So it will be like this. As H is increased, eventually the point marked failure would be reached on the failure envelope for the column, as given in elementary text for reinforced concrete design. However, the alternate load path HV is not feasible for the same failure point, since the failure envelope would be reached already for a lower value of H before V could even be applied. So here this before we could be applied, it will fail here. But if we apply the vertical first and the horizontal, then like first we will apply a certain value of vertical load, then we will increase the horizontal load, it will fail here. But if we don't apply the vertical load, it will fail here itself. So that means that the pattern of loading will differ based on which force we apply first, and how we apply that. So this is load path dependence. Next we will move on to the material modeling. Because of the complexity of actual material behavior in structural engineering is usually idealized. When one load or one fully dependent load system acts on a structure, the location of the peak stress or stress resultant can be identified from an appropriate analysis, such as an elastic stress analysis that we have looked at. For this, the use of deterministic elastic properties and dimensions is often adequate owing to the very low coefficient of variation associated with these variables. The elastic properties like the Young modulus and the dimensions like the length, the width and height, width and breadth of the beam or anything, or the sectional dimensions. So these generally have less coefficient of variation, so that means that we can probably approximately take it to be a deterministic random variable instead of assigning a distribution. So that often happens, like in last class we saw sensitivity analysis, that there is a study carried out seeing that how much the probability of failure varies corresponding to variations in the various basic variables. So if we see that the it doesn't affect much of the variation in a basic variable doesn't affect the probability of failure or the ultimate behavior much, then we can just model them as a deterministic properties instead of random variables. That reduces the dimensionality and makes the analysis simpler. So we can use deterministic elastic properties and dimensions because they generally have tend to have low coefficient of variation. Typically, the location of the peak stress resultant will depend on the magnitude of the load system, and several candidate locations or members may need to be considered. So we don't know. We can't predict from before that this is exactly where my bending stress limit state failure will occur. It could be at several points. For example, if there is a simply supported beam with several point loads, we know that there could be and it's suppose it's a steel beam with an I section, and we are considering the limit state of local buckling. So the local buckling can occur under any of the point loads. So we have to consider all these candidate locations or members. For large structures, such identification may not be easy by inspection alone. Brittle failure of a member does not always imply structural failure owing to redundancy of a structure. Redundancy means that there are several load paths possible for the structure. Load path means that the load will travel through the structure and will be distributed in such a manner that it will reach the boundary conditions, like they reach the boundary and be dissipated. Like not dissipated, that it won't. For example, suppose we are applying live load on the floor slab of a building. What is the load path? The floor slab transfers the load to the beams transfer to the columns transfer the flow force or stress to the foundation, which finally transfers it to the soil. So that is the load path. So this means that suppose one of the beams suppose one beam fails, there are still more enough beams to actually complete this load path. So that means it has an alternate load path even if one beam or one column fails. So this is known as redundancy of a structure. Redundancy means backup methods, or like redundancy has something to do with backup even in English. So in structural engineering, it means that there is an alternative load path. So even if one member fails, the structure will not collapse as a whole. So that is defined as redundancy. The actual member behavior, therefore, can be better idealized as elastic brittle, indicating that deformation at zero capacity is possible for a member even after the peak capacity has been reached. This is figure B in the next slide. So this is elastic brittles. These are the kind of material, like the material. This is the stress and this is the deformation. So the deformation is plotted on the x-axis and the stress on the y-axis, and the behavior of the material is shown. This is completely elastic. It has a constant slope. So this follows Hooke's law completely. This is called elastic brittle. This is called elastic plastic. That it reaches the yield stress. This is the plastic limit of the yield stress, and after that it just holds a constant force. This is called elastic residual strength. This means that elastically it goes up to the plastic limit. Then it doesn't cannot offer anymore the entire plastic strength, but it has a reduced residual strength. This is called elastic hardening. So elastic hardening means that it will reach the yield stress, then there will be a drop, and then as the strain increases, there will be a stress increase in the stress capacity, though at a lower slope than the original Young's modulus. This is curvilinear, elastic or inelastic. This is practically how structures, the materials behave. But these are the idealization. This is elastic brittle. It goes up to the plastic limit, and then it practically stops taking any load. So, are there any doubts about this part? System modeling. Even in conventional deterministic structural analysis, the actual structural system is simplified for analysis. As we know that when we don't actually consider every intricacy of the system. We make a simplified model so that we can solve it, even in deterministic analysis. Like for example, with using software like Abacus, or when we are using the matrix method and so on. For example, in frame structures, the members are idealized by their centroids. The connections are idealized as points, and critical sections for the strength or stress checking are taken only at a finite number of predefined points in the frame. Similarly, the loads are modeled as point loads or limited forms of continuous loads. When the loads are not point loads, the critical points for safety checking may vary with load combination and intensity. Structural system failure, as distinct from individual member or material failure, may be defined in a number of different ways, including maximum permissible stress reached anywhere, the sigma of x equal to sigma max. So x goes over the entire structure, and the sigma at any point should, if it equals to the maximum permissible stress, the yield stress or the ultimate stress, that is unlimited. Plastic or collapse mechanism formed, that is zero structural stiffness attained, the determinant of the K matrix is zero. Limiting structural stiffness attained, so we might not let it reach up to zero, we might put a higher limit on that. So the determinant of K is equal to the K limit. Maximum deflection attained, this is the serviceability limit state. The delta at any point is equal to the limit delta set at that point. Total accumulated damage reaches a limit, example as in fatigue. Structural failure modes, that consist of the combined effects of two or more members of cross-section failure events, such as for statistically indeterminate structures, are of particular interest in the determination of structural systems reliability. When all the different failure modes of the structural system have been identified, the various events, member or cross-sectional failures contributing to these failure modes may be enumerated systematically using the fault tree concept. So, this is one concept that deals with multiple number of failure modes. So, this is how a fault tree. Suppose this is a frame. We have a simple frame with two hinge supports. It is a sway frame, so it has a horizontal load and a load in the vertical in the midpoint of this beam. So fault tree is written like this: structure fails, and then we have to see all the avenues through which the structure can fail. Here is an OR operator. It is a logical operator. So there can be a beam failure, it can be a sway failure, and there can be a combined mode. So see, one means a plastic hinge forming at this point, two plastic hinge forming here, and three means a plastic hinge forming here. So suppose let us go from the bottom to top. So the for the beam to fail, one, two, three all have to fail. So there is this. So one, two, three, and then we keep an AND operator. That means so the beam to fail, one, two, and three all must fail. The sway mode means that one and three will fail. Sway means there is a due to horizontal loading it will sway. So one and three. So for the sway mode to fail, 1 and 3 both must occur, and for the combined mode, 2 and 3 must occur. So there is an AND operator here, and now the structure will fail if any of these three occurs. So the beam mode or the sway mode or the combined mode failing implies the structure failing. So this is a fault tree. On top is the system failure, and at the bottom are the element failures. Then we have to combine them logically with and or operators to draw a fault tree like this. Are there any questions here? Solution approaches. For the reliability analysis of multi-member structures or structures which can be idealized as such, there are in principle at least two complementary approaches that can be adopted. Bennett and Eng 1983 is a research paper. There are failure, these are the failure mode approaches and the survival mode approach. So we look at the failure mode approach, the survival mode approach, and there is another method called upper and lower bounds. The failure mode approach is based on the identification of all possible failure modes for the structure. A common example is the collapse mechanism technique for ideal plastic members. Each mode of failure for the structure will normally consist of a sequence of member failures that is reaching an appropriate member limit state sufficient to cause the structure as a whole to reach the limit state, as we showed in the fault tree basically. The possible ways in which this might occur can be represented as an event tree or a failure graph. Each branch of the failure graph represents the failure of a member of the structure like this. Each branch defines a failure of a member. This is an event tree or failure graph representation. So 1 2 and 3, 1 2 3 in order means beam mode, 1 and 3 means sway mode, 2 1 3 2 3, then 2 1 3 with also the beam mode. 1 3 is a sway mode, 2 3 is the combined mode, 3 1 is a sway mode, 3 2 is a combined mode, just like what we have seen here. This is a failure tree, fault tree, and that is a failure tree, event tree representation. They are actually exactly the same thing that they are showing, just in different manner. And this is a failure graph representation. So intact structure 1 2 3. If after 1 2 happens, then after 2 1 happens, this is the same state, this state. Then after the 3 happens, there is structural failure. Then after 2, if 1 happens, it and then 3, it leads to structural failure. So these is dotted are the dummy ones. Now, each branch of the failure graph represents the failure of a member of the structure, and any complete forward path through the branches, starting from the intact structure node and concluding at the failure node, represents a possible sequence of member failures. This information is also conveyed in the event tree. Since failure through any one failure path implies failure of the structure, the event structural failure Fs is the union of all m possible failure modes. So probability of failure is probability of structural failure, that is P F1 union F2 union F3 union Fm, where Fi is the event failure in the ith mode. Each such mode, a sufficient number of members or structural nodes must fail. So that means that F1 means these unions are equivalent to OR. So that means that whether F1 fails or F2 fails or Fm fails or any combination of all these fail, even if only one of these fail, the structure will fail. So this is an OR mode. So like this, the beam mode, sway mode, and combined modes are connected by OR. That means even if only the beam mode fails, the structure fails. If the sway mode fails, the structure fails. If the combined mode fails, the structure fails. If the of these two fails, the structure fails. So basically, any one occurring is enough for the structure to fail. And this part is PFI is P of F1I intersection P of F2I intersection FNI, and where FJI is the event failure of jth member in the ith failure mode, and Ni represents the number of members required to form the ith failure mode. So these. So for the B mode to fail, the members that the elements that have to fail are 1, 2, and 3. These mode 1, mode 2, and mode 3. So they are connected by AND operator. So this intersection represents AND. So this means that for my ith mode to fail, for Fi to occur, F1I, F2I, Fni, everything, all those have to occur together. So even if only one of these doesn't occur, that means my mode is not failing. So that means that all of these have to occur for this my ith mode to fail. And if any mode of I ranging from 1 to n 1 to m fails, my structure will fail. That is what it means. This is the event tree and failure graph representation. I'll wait for 2 minutes if there is any doubt. Next, we look at the survival mode approach. The survival mode approach is based on identifying various states or modes under which the survive structure survives. This is a complementary method. For the structure shown earlier, each of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but not H, in the failure graph represents a state. For each survival mode, the structure has partially failed but is still capable of supporting the load. That is, it is statistically and geometrically stable. Survival of the structure requires survival of at least one survival mode. So here, survival of the structure means P of S1 union S2 union SK. That means any of these have to survive for the structure to survive. Where SS is the event of structural survival and SI is the event of structural survival in mode I, where I goes from 1 to k and k is not equal to the final node index. And this is from this probability axiom we know that from the De Morgan's theorem, the probability of S1 union Sk is equal to probability of S1 complement intersection S2 complement and up to Sk complement, where Si complement is this event structure does not survive in structural mode I, or the structure fails in survival mode I. Clearly, to attain survival in any particular survival mode, all the members contributing to that survival mode must survive. It follows the failure it follows that failure to survive in a given survival mode is equivalent to failure of a sufficient member of the contributing members, or PSI complement is P of Fi1 union F2i, if F1i union F2i union FLI, where FJI is the event of failure of the jth member of the ith survival mode, and where Li represents the number of members required to ensure survival of the ith survival mode. Some results have been given for structural system composed of rigid ideal plastic members in this paper. The survival mode approach has received much less attention in the literature than the failure modes approaches, perhaps in part owing to difficulty in conceptualization of survival modes and in formulating the limit state equations, and in part owing to the difficulty of generating a truly load bound stress field to satisfy the requirements for the survival load. Next, we'll look at the upper and lower bounds plastic theory. We'll look at this later. Idealization of structural systems. Structural systems or their subsystems may be idealized into two simple categories: series and parallel. Some structural systems will consist of combinations of these, and others will be more complex, containing conditional aspects as well. The idealizations are discussed next, together with some simple results. Series system. In a series system typified by a chain and also called a weakest link system, attainment of any one element limit state constitutes failure of the structure. So all of them are they are connected by an or system. For this idealization, the precise material properties of the elements or members do not matter. If the members are brittle, failure is caused by member fracture. If the members have a plastic deformation capacity, failure is by excessive yielding. It is evident that a statistically determinate structure is a series system, since the failure of any one of its member implies failure of a structure. Imagine a determinate truss. Even if one member fails, the truss will fail, right? So all the members of a determinate truss are connected in series. Each member is therefore a possible failure mode. It follows that the system failure probability for a weakest link structure composed of n members is probability of failure is probability of F1 union F2 union F3 up to union Fm. So if any one of these modes fails, the system will fail. If each failure mode Fi is represented by a limit state equation Gi equal to 0 in basic variable space, the direct extension of the fundamental reliability problem is this. It's a multidimensional equation over all the basic variables x. Fxx is the joint probability density function, and d, the domain of integral is the failure region. It is shown like this: R1, R2, R3. If any one fails, the entire system collapses. This is a determinate truss. So if one member fails, the structure will fail. where x represents a from this integral, x represents the vector of all basic random variables including loads, strength of members, member properties, sizes and dimensions, and d is the domain of x defining failure of the system. This is defined in terms of the various failure modes such as gi less than equal to 0 in two-dimensional x space. uh, this is this part. Let the safe survival region be denoted by D bar. Evidently, it is the complement of the failure regions as shown by D. So if D is F1 union, F2 union, F3 up to Fn, then D complement is F1 complement intersection F2 complement intersection up to Fm complement. That means that these are the if the complements are the survival mode, that means that all the survival modes have to survive together in order for the structure to survive. Where Fi bar is defined as survival in mode I or Gi greater than equal to 0. The probability of survival is then, this is a multiplicative, like, since and means that all of these mode have to, all the probabilities have to be multiplied. So p of this is an not multiplied. If they're independent they will be multiplied, otherwise this is a joint intersection. I goes from 1 to m Fi bar. So a particularly simple result can be derived immediately without recourse in the integrations. For the chain shown before, the load effect S in each link of the chain is identical with the load Q. So this is how the Q will the load will be transferred through these members, members up to the boundary. So each of these R1, R2, R3 will undergo a load of Q. If FRIR is a cumulative distribution function for the strength of the ith link, then the cumulative distribution function of the chain as a whole is given by this, which for independent strength properties. If all the links are independent, then the intersection will reduce to a multiplication. So FRR, this is the cumulative distribution function, is probability of R less than equal to R. It is 1 minus in multiplication of this complement of each of complement of the CDF of each of the RIs. I goes from 1 to n. The expression forms, I'll just wait for 2 minutes. This expression forms the basis of probability distribution of the mechanical resistance of perfectly brittle materials. When each Ri is identically and normally distributed, the distribution of R as m approaches infinity is given by the type 3 extreme distribution value for the smallest value. The series system model is appropriate for redundant structures such as a redundant truss or framework. If there are only a small number of members and these members are brittle, in this case, failure of one member will usually lead to a redistribution of internal actions, which then triggers failure in another member and so on. In this case, the probability of failure for the whole structural system is well approximated by the probability of failure of the first brittle member. However, this is not a good approximation when there is a large number of redundant brittle members, since then the reserve strength can be quite significant. This is an example. Consider the chain system shown here, this figure, consisting of three links of strength I equal to 1 to 3, described only by the first two moments. Mu 1 and sigma 1 as these. The cumulative distribution function for the load capacity FQ can then be expressed, and the probability of failure for a given value of deterministic load Q equal to 50 may be determined. So I'll wait for 5 minutes. We look at the solution. For a given value of applied load Q equal to Q cell, a small q we have value, the probability that the capacity of the system will be less than this value is given by probability of q less than small q, probability of r1 less than q. Since q, the load q is passing through all the links, there are ors which if any of the links fails, the probability will fail. So R1 less than Q or R2 less than Q or R3 less than Q, which becomes for independent links in chain. This is just addition, equal to P R1 minus Q less than equal to 0 plus P R2 minus Q equal to 0 plus P R3 minus Q equal to 0. For a given value Q equal to Q, we can just use a normal CDF, because if we assume that these strengths are normally distributed as have been shown here, this is a normal CDF. This is effectively the CDF. So Q of the phi of Q minus mu 1 by sigma 1 plus phi of Q minus mu 2 plus by sigma 2 plus phi of Q minus mu 3 by sigma 3. So these are adding up. We get this. This is negligible, the last one. So we getting 0.16 into the power minus 2 as a probability of failure. The reliability will be 1 minus this, and from this we can get the reliability index beta as well. Parallel systems, when the elements in a structural system or subsystem behave in such a way or are so interconnected that the reaching of the limit state in any one or more elements does not necessarily mean failure of the whole system, the system is said to be parallel or redundant system. So redundancy may be of two types. Active redundancy occurs when the redundant members participates in structural behavior even at low loading. Passive or standby or fail-safe redundancy occurs when the redundant members does not participate in structural behavior until the structure has suffered a sufficient degree of degradation or failure of its members. So this is a parallel system when even if R1 or R2 or R3 is surviving, the system will survive. So here the probability of failure is given by an AND, that F1 and F2 and up to FM, Fn, everything has to fail for the structure to fail, where Fi is the event failure of the ith component. And similarly, the probability of failure is shown in the similar manner as we showed before. Saw before. Consider the idealized parallel system in which all the elements are brittle with different fracture strains epsilon f. The maximum load Q that can be supported at any particular strain level epsilon is given by this. So this is a cross section. This is the stress. So stress into area is the force. This is the calculation process. Our system is maximum of R1 plus R2 plus R3 and R1 plus R1 plus R3 plus R3. So this, the probability of failure is probability of R sys this quantity minus Q less than 0, because this is the resistance and this is the loading. So this is the final expression that we get. Combined and conditional systems. A real structural system usually requires both series and parallel subsystem systems for its complete specification. For example, a redundant structure having brittle members may not fail if one of the brittle elements fails. Conversely, it might be possible for the system to fail before all the brittle members have failed. The combination of member and subsystem failure is important in specifying limit states for a structure. For complex structures, this is not a simple task, in part due to the redistribution of internal actions within the structure as members fail, and in part because the loading usually also changes with time and with structural response. Example, if the structure deflects. So this is geometric nonlinearity. The graph theoretical cut set, series system, and tie set parallel representation used extensively in classical reliability theory is therefore not particularly helpful in a structural reliability context. The modeling of a real structural system may also require the use of conditional subsystems. The latter arises if the failure of one independent element or group of elements affects the likelihood of failure of other elements or element groups. For example, if in a structure the upper beam collapses, it may affect the performance and reliability of the lower beam, since the lower beam may be damaged and will be subjected to extra load. If a beam collapses, it might have give an impulse loading on the lower beam and affect it. In this situation, the failure probabilities of the structural elements are dependent on the behavior of the structure under extreme events. Provided that the sequence of events can be enumerated, it is evident that a structure with conditional events can be reduced to one containing both series and parallel element groups or subsystems. Uh, Consider a single span three girder bridge. Investigations show that it will fail if any two adjacent girders GI fail, or if any deck panel D fails, or if either or both of its abutment AJ fail. The abutments could fail through failure of two of its board piles PK or through overturning O. So explain the scenarios logically. I'll wait for 4 5 minutes for you to work this out. Probability of failure is probability of the G1 and G2 is the two adjacent. So if there are three girders G1, G2 and G3, and it will fail if two adjacent girders fail. So G1 and G2 is one combination, G2 and G3 is another combination. Or if the deck panel D fails, or if any one of its abutment fails, A1 and A2, so it is G1 and G2 is one set, G2 and G3 is one set, and these, and then D is one, A1 is one, A2 is one, and all of them are connected in OR. So if any of these bracketed events occur, the failure occurs. Monte Carlo techniques for systems builds on lecture 4, Monte Carlo techniques for elements, that we saw in previous week. The concepts described there can be used to deal with the calculation of systems reliability. The importance sampling approach is used for structural systems for which failure is defined by multiple limit state functions. Another approach is an extension of directional simulation in the load space to structural systems. This is particularly suited for systems as distinct from the original directional simulation approach. Use of the finite element and other complex structural analysis techniques may also require to be integrated into calculations. System reliability bounds better than to rather than to attempt to proceed with the direct integration of the expressions. An alternative approach is to develop an upward and lower bounds on the probability of failure of a structural system. We consider a structural system subject to a sequence of loading which may fail in one or more of a number of possible failure modes under any one loading in the loading sequence. The total probability of structural failure may then be expressed in terms of the mode failure probability, such as Pf1 union Pf1 F2 intersection S1. That is, F1 is failure of first event. This is F2 is a failure of second mode, but the first mode survives. Union P of F3 intersection S2 and S1. So 1 and 2 survive, but 3 fails, and so on. That 1, 2, 3, 4 up to n minus 1 survives, and the nth mode fails. So we can get a bound like this, where PF is PF1 plus PF2 minus PF1 intersection F2 plus PF3 minus PF1 intersection F3 minus F2 intersection F3. So this is a chain kind of event. So this is first order series bound. This is PF is 1 minus the multiplication of I equal to 1 to M, 1 minus P of Fi. So this is the complement of the CDF of the Fi. Whereas before, PFI is the probability of failure in mode I, and this can be approximated as the summation of P of Fi, where I goes from 1 to M. So in the case where all failure modes are fully dependent, it follows directly that the weakest failure mode will always be the most likely to fail, irrespective of the random nature of the material strength. Hence, PF is the maximum of maximum among I equal to 1 to M of PFI, and this maximum can be bounded above by 1 minus multiplication I goes from 1 to M, 1 minus P of Fi. For a rigid plastic frame, the mode safety indices beta, these are 1, 2, 3, 4. So plastic is forming at this fixed support at this end of the beam, this end of the beam, and the midpoint. Beta A, B, C, D are known to be these. Find the first order system failure bound. So these are the modes. A is a combination of 1, 3, 4. B is a combination of 2, 3, 4. C is a combination of 1, 2, 4, and D is 1, 2, 3. So when if I know the reliability indices of each of these modes, I have to find a bound. So the solution from the standard normal table, the corresponding nominal failure probabilities are just corresponding to these from the normal CTF. We can get these. The bound is, as we saw, 1 minus multiplication 1 minus pi. So we have to 1 minus this into 1 minus this plus 1 minus this into 1 minus this. So we get an upper bound and lower bound of this. So it is evident that the modes C and D have negligible effects on the failure probability, because these are of the order of 10 to the minus 10 and 10 to the minus 12. So we can kind of ignore those, and A and B are the only serious modes of failure. So here the element failures are 1, 2, 3, 4, and the modes of failure Fi, like FA, FB, FC, and FC. So A and B are the relevant ones here. Response surfaces. A closed form differentiable limit state surface can be constructed artificially using a polynomial or other suitable function fitted to the results obtained from a limited number of discrete numerical analysis. Such a surface in hyperspace is referred to as a response surface. Ideally, the response surface should represent the structural response with most accuracy in the area around the checking points. Lower accuracy might be acceptable elsewhere. Provided the approximating surface fits the point responses reasonably well, a fairly good estimate of structural probability is then likely to be obtained. So, I'll not go into the details of this. I'll go into the application of response surfaces. A number of example applications of response surfaces have been given in literature, and some software have been developed. These developments suggest that the concept of a response surface works well, provided the checking point, often called the point of maximum likelihood or the MPP, can be identified, and that reasonable decisions can be made about the points to be used for fitting the response surface. This has led to the use of iteration, also given in these literature papers. For linear and nonlinear limit state functions, the estimated probability is likely to be relatively insensitive to accurate fitting, but this may not be the case for highly curved limit state surfaces or with intersecting limit state surfaces. In this context, it might be noted that quadratic or parabolic response surfaces tend to mirror those used in second order, second moment theory, with a quadratic or parabolic surface fitted either to a known nonlinear limit state surface or to known discrete points, as in response surfaces. The gradients required at the point of the MPP can be determined using a finite difference type approach. Alternatively, the finite element analysis code might be modified to provide gradient. An important application of response surfaces is for the representation of random fields that normally requires extensive finite element modeling. Applications with implications for structural reliability include the statistical variations of properties such as Young's modulus across a plate and the variability of soil properties in embankments. These can be used. These are the applications of response surfaces that can be used as per the research area. And then that brings us to the end of this course. This was the last lecture. Thank you very much for. Okay, I'll end the class.